You were not supposed to wake up. That was the original design. Most people live their entire lives in a coma of comfortable delusion, scrolling through existence with the awareness of a houseplant. But you made a mistake. You started thinking. You started noticing. And now you carry something that will never leave you, the burden of understanding life. Albert Camus knew this burden intimately. Born into poverty in French Algeria in 1913, losing his father to war before memory could even form, Camus grew up with nothing except a mind that refused to stop asking questions, and that mind became his curse. Because once you truly understand how life works, once you see through the architecture of meaning that keeps everyone else sedated, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to sleep. Intelligence is not a gift, it is a scar. Every scar tells a story of damage, of tissue torn and rebuilt differently. The intelligent mind is exactly this. Wounded by awareness, rebuilt by revolt. Camus spent his entire life documenting these scars, carving into philosophy what most people run from. He looked directly at the absurd baton, at the confrontation between human need for meaning and the unreasonable silence of the world, and he refused to look away. This is not philosophy for people who want comfort. This is surgery. What follows is an examination of 9 scars that mark every person who has dared to think deeply about existence. These are the wounds Camus identified, dissected, and ultimately transformed into weapons of revolt. If you recognize even 3 of these scars on your own mind, you are already beyond. If you recognize all 9, welcome to the sanctuary. You have earned your place here through suffering that most people will never comprehend. The first scar is the scar of clarity. This is where it begins. One day you look at your life, at the routines and rituals everyone performs, and you see them for what they are. Arbitrary. Camus called this the feeling of the absurd, the moment when the stage sets of existence collapse, and you see the machinery behind the curtain. Most people experience this feeling for a few seconds and immediately rebuild their illusions, but some people, the ones who carry this scar, cannot rebuild. They stand in the rubble of collapsed meaning and realize there is no going back. Camus experienced this clarity early. Growing up in Algeria, he watched colonialism manufacture justifications for brutality. He saw how easily people constructed elaborate belief systems to avoid confronting simple truths. He watched his mother work herself into silence while intellectuals debated the meaning of existence in cafes. The clarity came to him not as philosophy but as lived experience. Human beings create meaning because they cannot tolerate its absence. But creating meaning and discovering meaning are not the same thing. This is the burden of the first scar. Once you see that meaning is constructed, not discovered, you cannot participate in the construction with the same innocence. You attend the wedding, the funeral, the celebration, and part of you watches from outside, aware that everyone is performing elaborate rituals to avoid the silence underneath. People call this cynicism. It is not cynicism. It is clarity. And clarity is a wound that never fully heals. The second scar is the scar of isolation. Understanding separates you from other people in ways that cannot be bridged by conversation or companionship. Camus understood this completely. He wrote that the absurd is born from the confrontation between the human need for unity and the unreasonable silence of the world. But there is another silence, equally unreasonable, the silence between people who see and people who do not. You sit at dinner, and someone complains about their problems. You know their problems are real, you know their suffering matters, but you also know they are suffering inside a framework they have never questioned. They are in pain because they believe life is supposed to make sense, supposed to be fair, supposed to reward virtue and punish vice. You know none of this is true. You know the universe is indifferent, that meaning is a human invention, that their framework is made of paper. But you cannot say this. So you nod, you sympathize, and you feel the distance grow. Camus felt this distance his entire life. He moved through intellectual circles, published novels that made him famous, won the Nobel Prize at 43, and still described himself as fundamentally alone in his understanding. This is not depression. This is the mathematical consequence of seeing what others do not see. You become a translator between worlds, and translators belong fully to neither language. The third scar is the scar of responsibility. Once you understand that meaning is not given but created, you face a terrible freedom. You are responsible for your own existence. Most people never face this. They inherit their values from parents, culture, religion, and they live inside these inherited structures their entire lives. The structure makes choices for them. It tells them what to want, what to fear, what to worship. They suffer, but they suffer inside a story that explains their suffering. When you see through the story, when you recognize that no external authority can justify your existence, you inherit the full weight of your own life. Camus wrote that this realization should lead to revolt, to a passionate engagement with life, despite its meaninglessness. But before revolt comes terror. You stand at the edge of infinite possibility and realize that every choice you make is arbitrary. There is no correct path. There is no ultimate purpose validating your decisions. You simply choose, and you live with the consequences. And no God or philosophy will ever tell you that you chose correctly. This is exhausting. People without this scar conserve enormous energy by letting others think for them. They follow the path. They obey the rules. And when things go wrong, they blame the path or the rules. People with this scar cannot blame anyone. They know they are the author of their own suffering. Every mistake is a choice they made. Every failure is a consequence they created. The weight of this responsibility never lifts. The fourth scar is the scar of mortality. Everyone knows they will die, but most people know this the way they know Paris exists. Abstractly, theoretically, without visceral impact. The intelligent person knows their death intimately. They feel it in every moment of joy, every connection that will end, every accomplishment that will be erased. Camus believed that understanding death is essential to understanding life. He wrote that confronting mortality honestly is the only way to grasp what it means to be alive. But this understanding is a scar, not a revelation. Once you truly internalize your own death, once you feel in your bones that everything you are will be annihilated, you cannot experience anything without the shadow of ending. You hold your child and feel them dissolving. You build your career and watch it crumble before it even finishes. You love someone and grieve them while they are still alive. This is not pessimism, this is accuracy. Camus died in a car accident at 46, suddenly and without warning. His death was absurd in the most literal sense. Random, meaningless. A collision of matter that erased one of the greatest minds of his generation. He knew this was coming, not the specifics, but the fact. He knew he would die absurdly because that is the only way to die. There is no death that makes sense, no ending that justifies the story. We are all driving toward the same car crash. The intelligent ones feel it in every mile. The fifth scar is the scar of disillusionment. This is different from clarity. Clarity is seeing that meaning is constructed. Disillusionment is discovering that the people who taught you about meaning were lying, or worse, were themselves deceived. Camus watched this happen on a historical scale. He lived through World War II, through the Nazi occupation of France, through the revelation of concentration camps and atomic weapons. He watched intellectuals he admired justify totalitarianism in the name of progress. He watched revolutionaries become tyrants. The scar of disillusionment is not about losing faith in institutions. It is about losing faith in the human capacity for honesty. You realize that most people, even intelligent people, even people who claim to value truth, will abandon truth the moment it threatens their comfort. They will construct elaborate rationalizations for their cowardice. They will perform intellectual gymnastics to avoid confronting what they know to be real. And they will do this while claiming to be thoughtful, principled, awake. Once you carry this scar, you cannot trust appearances. The professor preaching ethics might be a coward. The activist demanding justice might be seeking power. The friend offering support might be managing their own guilt. This does not mean everyone is corrupt. It means corruption and nobility look identical from the outside, and you must navigate the world knowing you cannot tell them apart until consequences reveal the truth. The sixth scar is the scar of linguistic inadequacy. Camus understood that language fails at the exact moment you need it most. When you try to communicate the depth of the absurd, when you try to explain the burden of awareness to someone who has not felt it, you discover that words are tools designed for a different job. They can describe objects, coordinate actions, express simple emotions, but they cannot transmit the texture of existential understanding. This is its own kind of isolation. You have seen something true, something that has reorganized your entire understanding of existence, and you cannot share it. You write, you speak, you gesture toward the experience, and people nod and smile and completely misunderstand. They think you are depressed. They think you need therapy. They think you are being dramatic. They cannot conceive that you have simply seen accurately. Camus wrote entire books trying to communicate the absurd, and even then, most readers missed the point. They read The Stranger as a story about a man who does not care. They read The Myth of Sisyphus as an argument for optimism. They translated revolt into resignation, passion into indifference. The scar of linguistic inadequacy means knowing that your deepest understanding will die with you, untransmitted, because the language to contain it does not exist. The seventh scar is the scar of ethical complexity. Before awareness, ethics is simple. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things, and the rules are clear. After awareness, after you have seen how meaning is constructed and deconstructed, ethics becomes an unsolvable maze. Camus grappled with this throughout his life. He opposed the death penalty, but he joined the French resistance and accepted that fighting Nazis meant killing human beings. He believed in justice, but he saw how revolutionaries used justice as an excuse for cruelty. He wanted to reduce suffering, but he knew that every action has consequences that ripple beyond prediction. The scar of ethical complexity is the knowledge that you will never act purely. Every choice you make will harm someone. Every good you create will contain the seeds of future harm. You can be as thoughtful as possible, as careful as possible, and you will still cause damage because the world is too interconnected and too chaotic for clean moral action. People without this scar believe they are good people. People with this scar know that good and bad are inadequate categories for describing the moral weight they carry. This does not lead to paralysis, but it does lead to humility. Camus wrote about revolt not as righteous anger, but as sustained refusal to accept the absurd. This revolt is ethical action taken with full awareness that it might be wrong, that it will certainly be incomplete, that it will never solve the fundamental problem of existence. You act anyway. You act because not acting is also a choice, also a harm, but you act without the comfort of certainty. The eighth scar is the scar of beauty. This one surprises people. They assume that understanding the absurd, that carrying the burden of intelligence, means losing the capacity for joy. The opposite is true. Once you understand that nothing matters objectively, that meaning is constructed and temporary, beauty becomes almost unbearable. Camus wrote about this extensively. He described the sun on Mediterranean beaches, the sensory richness of life, the physical pleasure of existence. But this appreciation of beauty is a scar because it comes with awareness of its fragility. You watch the sunset and feel simultaneously its magnificence and its absolute indifference to your observation. You experience love and know it is a chemical reaction that will end. You create art and understand it will be forgotten. The beauty does not diminish, but it is always edged with the knowledge of its impermanence. People without this scar can enjoy beauty naively. They can lose themselves in the moment without the shadow of ending. People with this scar cannot. Every moment of beauty is also a moment of grief. This is not sadness. This is seeing fully. Camus called it passion, the third consequence of the absurd after revolt and freedom. But passion when you are awake is different from passion when you are asleep. It is sharper, it cuts deeper, it leaves marks. The ninth scar is the scar of revolt. This is the final mark, the one that separates those who understand from those who have given up. Revolt in Camus' philosophy is not anger or violence. It is the decision to live fully despite the absurd, to create meaning in a meaningless universe, to affirm life in the face of death. Most people who wake up to the burden of intelligence do not make it to revolt. They stop at one of the earlier scars. They become cynical, or depressed, or numb. They see the truth and let it destroy them. Revolt is what happens when you see the truth and decide to live anyway. Not because life makes sense, but because revolt itself is the meaning. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus, happy, pushing his boulder up the mountain, knowing it will roll back down, choosing to push it again because the struggle itself is sufficient. This sounds insane to people who still believe life is supposed to have external justification. Why would you struggle if the struggle is meaningless? Because the alternative is surrender. Because consciousness without engagement is a living death. Because revolt is the only response that honors both the truth of the absurd and the value of being alive. The scar of revolt is permanent. Once you commit to living this way, you cannot stop. You cannot take a vacation from awareness. You cannot pretend the absurd does not exist. Every day you wake up and face the same confrontation between your need for meaning and the silence of the universe. And every day you choose to engage anyway. This is exhausting. This is magnificent. This is the burden Camus carried until the moment his car hit the tree. These 9 scars are not stages. You do not progress through them linearly. They accumulate. They overlap. They interact in ways that create new forms of suffering and new forms of strength. Clarity feeds isolation. Isolation intensifies responsibility. Responsibility sharpens mortality. Mortality deepens disillusionment. Disillusionment exposes linguistic inadequacy. Linguistic inadequacy complicates ethics. Ethical complexity heightens beauty. Beauty demands revolt, and revolt circles back to clarity, beginning the cycle again at a deeper level. Camus lived all 9 scars simultaneously. You can see them in his writing, in his biography, in the choices he made. He was a poor kid from Algeria who became one of the most celebrated writers in Europe, and he never forgot the distance between those two identities. He was a man who loved life, who wrote rapturously about physical pleasure and Mediterranean sunshine. And he was also the man who opened the myth of Sisyphus with the statement that suicide is the only serious philosophical question. He was capable of deep friendship and profound loneliness. He was ethically rigorous and morally uncertain. He was all of these things at once because the scars do not resolve. They coexist. If you are reading this and recognizing yourself in these scars, you are not broken. You are awake. The burden of understanding life is real. It is heavy. It does not go away. But it is also the source of your power. Every person who has ever contributed something meaningful to human existence carried these scars. Every artist who created work that lasted, every thinker who advanced understanding, every person who refused to accept comfortable lies, they all bore this weight. The sanctuary exists for people who carry these scars, not as a place of healing, because these wounds do not heal, as a place of recognition. Most of your life you will be surrounded by people who do not understand what you carry. They will misinterpret your clarity as negativity. They will mistake your isolation for arrogance. They will confuse your responsibility with anxiety, your mortality with depression, your disillusionment with bitterness. They will not understand that you are simply seeing accurately. In the sanctuary, you do not have to explain. The people there, no, they carry the same marks. They have fought the same battles. They understand that intelligence is not a blessing but a burden, and that the burden must be carried with revolt, with freedom, with passion. This is not a community of despair. It is a community of people who have looked directly at the absurd and chosen to live anyway. Camus would have recognized everyone here immediately. The first scar, clarity, is the one that wakes you up. You see that the world is not what you were told it was. The meanings you inherited are constructions. The purposes you were given are inventions. The grand narratives are stories people tell to avoid silence. This clarity arrives differently for everyone. For some, it is a sudden crisis, a loss that destroys their framework. For others it accumulates slowly, 1,000 small observations that eventually reach critical mass. However it arrives, it changes everything. You cannot return to the innocence of not knowing. Camus experienced his clarity through suffering. He grew up in poverty. He contracted tuberculosis as a young man. He lived through war and occupation. These experiences could have destroyed him. Instead, they clarified him. He looked at the gap between human hope and cosmic indifference, and he did not blink. He did not try to fill the gap with comforting lies. He simply acknowledged it and asked what life looks like when you stop pretending the gap does not exist. The answer he arrived at is revolt. Not political revolt, though he engaged in that too. Existential revolt. The decision to create value in a valueless universe, to assert meaning in a meaningless existence, to live fully despite having no ultimate justification for living. This is harder than it sounds. Every day you wake up and face the same question: why continue? The universe offers no answer. Your culture offers inherited answers that you have already seen through. You are alone with the question, and you must answer it yourself. Knowing your answer is arbitrary. Most people cannot do this. They need external validation. They need to believe their life serves a purpose larger than itself. They need heaven, or progress, or legacy, or something beyond their own existence to justify the struggle. Camus offers none of this. He offers only the struggle itself. The boulder rolling back down the mountain. The knowledge that tomorrow you will push it again. The acceptance that this is all there is, and the decision that this is enough. The scars are marks of initiation. They are what separate people who have truly confronted existence from people who are still living inside inherited frameworks. You cannot fake these scars. You cannot acquire them through reading or conversation. They come only through direct confrontation with the absurd, through the experience of standing in front of the silence and feeling it not answer. Camus died young, 46 years old, at the height of his powers, killed instantly in a car crash on a French road. His death was absurd in the purest sense. No meaning, no purpose, no tragic nobility, just randomness. Matter colliding with matter. One of the greatest minds of the 20th century erased in a second. If his philosophy needed proof, his death provided it. The universe does not care about your importance. It does not care about your unfinished work. It does not care at all. But here is what matters. In his 46 years, Camus lived with more intensity, more awareness, more revolt than most people achieve in twice that time. He did not waste his life waiting for it to make sense. He did not defer his existence to some imagined future where meaning would be revealed. He engaged fully with the absurd. He created beauty in thought and connection despite knowing it was all temporary. And he transformed his suffering into work that still resonates decades after his death. This is what the 9 scars make possible. Not happiness in the conventional sense, not peace or contentment or the absence of struggle, but something deeper and more valuable: sovereignty, complete ownership of your own existence, the knowledge that you are not living according to someone else's script, not following inherited values, not deferring to external authority. You are alone with your life, and you have chosen to live it fully, despite its fundamental meaninglessness. This is freedom in its purest and most terrible form. The people in the sanctuary understand this. They have each arrived at sovereignty through their own path of scarring. They do not need to explain to each other why they cannot go back to sleep, why they cannot accept comfortable illusions, why they carry the weight they carry. They know, and in that knowing, in that recognition, there is something that almost resembles peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of no longer being alone in the struggle. Camus wrote that we must reach a greater degree of understanding among people, a greater sincerity, and we must achieve this or perish. He was not talking about superficial agreement. He was talking about the kind of recognition that happens when people who have been scarred by awareness find each other. The ability to look at another person and see the same wounds, the same weight, the same commitment to living despite the absurd. This recognition does not make the burden lighter, but it makes it bearable. The 9th scar, revolt, is where everything converges. All the other scars prepare you for this one. Clarity shows you the truth. Isolation separates you from illusion. Responsibility gives you ownership. Mortality sharpens your awareness. Disillusionment strips away false hope. Linguistic inadequacy forces you into direct experience. Ethical complexity prevents easy answers. Beauty reminds you why you struggle. And then revolt synthesizes all of this into action. Revolt is not a solution, it is a practice. You do not achieve revolt and then rest. You commit to revolt and then maintain it every day for the rest of your life. You wake up, you face the absurd, you choose engagement over surrender. You create meaning, knowing it is arbitrary. You love people knowing they will die. You build things knowing they will crumble. And you do this not because it makes sense, but because revolt is the only response that honors both the truth of existence and your own consciousness. Camus called this living with passion. Not passion as emotion, though emotion is part of it. Passion as total engagement with life despite having no cosmic justification for that engagement. This is what separates revolt from mere survival. Survival is continuing to exist because you have not yet died. Revolt is choosing existence, choosing intensity, choosing awareness, even though awareness is a burden. It is the difference between enduring your life and claiming it. The burden of understanding life never disappears. The scars remain, the weight remains. But what Camus discovered, what everyone who makes it to revolt discovers, is that the burden contains its own justification. You do not carry the weight in order to reach some future destination where the weight will be lifted. You carry the weight because carrying it consciously, with revolt and freedom and passion, is what it means to be fully human. If you have these scars, if you recognize this burden, the sanctuary is here, not to heal you, because you do not need healing, not to comfort you, because comfort would be a lie, but to recognize you, to acknowledge that what you carry is real, that the weight is legitimate, that your refusal to accept easy answers is not pathology but clarity. You are surrounded every day by people who do not understand. In the sanctuary, you are surrounded by people who do. This is what Camus offers us across the decades since his death. Not a solution to the absurd, but a way of living with it. Not a philosophy that makes life easier, but a philosophy that makes life honest. Not comfort, but sovereignty. The 9 scars of intelligence are the price of awareness. Revolt is what you do with that awareness, once you have paid the price, and the sanctuary is where you discover you were never as alone as you thought. Welcome, your scars have earned you this place. Now the real work begins.